Hello and a very warm welcome to a brand new edition of World Panorama with me, Frank Pereira. And as always, let's get you updated with the latest international headlines. US President Barack Obama orders warplanes back into the skies over Iraq. US Air Armada's first mission is to drop food and water. Obama also authorizes military to carry out targeted strikes. Less than 2 weeks since the US and EU hit Russia with their sanctions, Putin responds with some sanctions of his own. Russia bans food and dairy products from the European Union, the United States, Canada, Australia and Norway for 1 year. US Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel meets Prime Minister Narendra Modi, Sushma Swaraj and Arun Jaitley on a 3-day visit to boost bilateral ties. Cambodian court finds the two most senior surviving leaders of the Khmer Rouge guilty of crimes against humanity, duo sentenced to life in prison. Spanish footballer Xavi retires from internationals at the age of 34. The midfielder represented his country 133 times. He will continue to play for his club Barcelona and lead them. Our top focus this week, US President Barack Obama has authorized airstrikes in northern Iraq. Obama said targeted airstrikes on militants can protect American personnel in Erbil and Baghdad if it came under pressure. He has more.
Barack Obama giving the go-ahead for airstrikes, opening the door for targeted airstrikes in Iraq against the Islamic militants. The president said his action will protect US interests and prevent slaughter of religious minorities.
In recent days, these terrorists have continued to move across Iraq and have neared the city of Erbil, where American diplomats and civilians serve at our consulate and American military personnel advise Iraqi forces. To stop the advance on Erbil, I've directed our military to take targeted strikes against ISIL terrorist convoys should they move toward the city.
On a day when the White House keenly debated its response to the ISIS army, the US jets dropped relief material in Iraq. The mass civilian displacement in the country is moving closer to the stable Kurdistan region.
والله صار لنا 4 أيام 5 أيام احنا بتشول مدمرين عوائل وهذا الله وكيلك هذا حاله يومي جاكم اسمه 11 راح 11 جاكم 11 راح.
Iraq's largest Christian city, Qarakosh, in the country's northwest was left abandoned. In the Kurdish stronghold of Erbil, residents flocked to markets to stock up on food and supplies.
على مود الأحداث يعني أخاف ما نحصل شيء الوضع السياسي أو الوضع العسكري ما أكو مشاكل على مود هذا.
After an emergency meeting, the US Security Council called on the international community to support the Iraqi people and the government.
Members of the Security Council condemned the attacks in Iraq's Nineveh province, including Sinjar and Tal Afar, by the Islamic State in Iraq and the Levant, and again expressed their deep outrage about the hundreds of thousands of Iraqis, many of them from vulnerable minority communities, especially Yazidis and Christians, displaced by ISIL's attacks and in urgent need of humanitarian assistance.
Since June, the ISIS has rapidly taken control of the northern city of Mosul and advanced south towards Baghdad. It now controls large swathes of Iraq and Syria and maintains that it has created an Islamic caliphate. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
Well, joining me for a chat on this issue this week is former Ambassador Meera Shankar. Welcome to the show, Ambassador Shankar, and thank you for joining us. Let's talk about this particular issue in detail now. The Obama administration initially, about a couple of weeks ago, came out and said that, their involvement in Iraq would be minimal. But now they seem to have ordered airstrikes. Airstrikes have already taken place. The aeroplanes have already started dropping food and other critical supplies into the region. What seems to have changed over the last few weeks?
I think the possibility of a major humanitarian crisis and the impact that this was having on the minorities. I think the Yazdis from Sinjar have fled because hundreds of them have been killed apparently, and so also the Christians from Karakush. And there are about 200,000 displaced persons moving towards the Kurdish region. I think the US has a dilemma. They want to try to head this off, head progress of the Islamic State towards Erbil and towards Baghdad, and to protect the minorities, but they don't want to get involved in a larger conflict.
Dilemma is the right word that he used, because I mean, a few years ago, the Americans pulled out completely from Iraq. This decision by the American government was hailed back home, and you know they were welcomed. You know there was a rousing reception for the army that went back, and now suddenly, all of a sudden, the situation seems to have deteriorated so much that the American intervention is inevitable, isn't it?
Well, I would say that they are still trying to keep it limited. If you look at what President Obama has said, he said, firstly, why are they intervening? One is because of the possibility of a horrific massacre of minorities, to head it off or to prevent it. Secondly, because they have a mandate in the sense of a request from the Iraqi government to come to their assistance. And thirdly, because they have the unique capabilities to be able to prevent this kind of massacre. But he has tried to define the limits by saying, I am not, going to, allow the US to be dragged into another war in Iraq, and there will be no combat boots on the ground. At the moment,
but it seems to be heading in that direction. I mean, day by day, what's alarming is the fact that the militants seem to be progressing with ease. I mean, there is no resistance whatsoever.
That is true. But I think at the moment, if we go strictly by what the US has said, they are trying to draw limits to their engagement, and they're saying they are there to protect, their assets in Erbil and Baghdad, and to head off a massacre of the minorities. The larger question they emphasize is a political one for Iraqis to settle. There can't be any military solution by the US to the larger question of giving a stake to all communities in the Iraqi government. So they're trying to draw a distinction between the nature of their action, which is limited, to protecting a massacre of the minorities and any attack on US interests or US personnel in Erbil and Baghdad, because the US has 800 advisors, military advisors in Iraq right now, some in Baghdad, some in Erbil. They have 2 joint operations centers, but they have no combat troops.
Yes, they don't. They indeed do not have any combat troops. Could this particular incident, the incident where the Kurds, who are considered to be fierce fighters, they were defeated with utmost ease by the militants, could that particular issue have, did that have any kind of bearing on President Obama's decision to send in the aeroplanes?
I think so, but also, as I said, the fate of the minorities, the Christians and the Yazdis, has generated pressures. Because there are about 200,000 displaced persons. The minorities are being given a choice, at least the Christians, to convert or pay a tax. The Yazdis aren't even being given this choice. So I think that has generated pressures, but also the very swift progress towards Kurdistan and, the vast swathes of territory that ISIS has now under its control in the north and the west. But still, I want to emphasize right now that the US is not, it's trying to make it clear that it doesn't see an open-ended involvement. that its objectives are limited, and that the larger issue of how to deal with the Islamic State is really something which Iraq has to resolve politically.
Is President Obama trying to right the wrongs that were committed, or many critics would say the many wrongs that were committed by President Bush way back in 2003? Because if you look at the entire region as a whole, after Saddam Hussein was executed, after he was killed, the entire region seems to have gone into a turmoil.
I think so. I think there are a number of complex factors at play and several overlapping conflicts in the region. First of all, there was the problem of lack of governance, lack of representation, which manifested itself in Tunisia and then Egypt with the Arab Spring. But then, it let loose forces which have made stability in this region extremely fragile. Secondly, you have the efforts to isolate Iran, undertaken both by the US and Israel and also by the Gulf states. You have the Shia-Sunni conflict, you have the Israel-Palestine conflict, and you have the Arab-Persian conflict. And all this, I think, has created a situation of great turmoil within the region. I mean, if you look at the situation in Iraq, I mean, you can say the US intervention in Iraq in some way set the stage for exacerbation of these conflicts. And then the intervention in Syria, because radicalized Islamic groups were at the forefront of the opposition to the Assad regime. And so was ISIS, which first began, in Baghdad and later extended its operations to Syria and now has come back to Iraq and also the northeastern part of Syria. So it's a very complex situation, highly volatile, and no easy solutions in sight.
Indeed, no easy solution when it comes to matters such as these. But, I was reading a couple of reports and that suggested the swift movement of the militants or the pace at which they are advancing is attributed to many factors. And some of the key factors are that, the morale of the Iraqi army is so low, is that, they do not want to put up a resistance. They're just fleeing backwards and fleeing further interior. And what's happening is that way, the militants keep advancing forward and there is no resistance. And another reason being, the military is also leaving behind most of the equipment that was left there by the Americans to defend themselves. Now that equipment is in the arms of the militants, and that's why they're finding it so easy there.
I think also because of the ethnically mixed composition of the Iraqi army and the fact that a lot of Sunnis have been alienated, not just the radical Islamic hardliners, but a lot of those who were Baathists or other Iraqi Sunnis, and they've made common cause with ISIS or the Islamic State. So, and these are people who may not, in the long run, support a radical Islamic ideology.
But because of a lack of choice.
Because of a lack of choice or a lack of a sense of participation in the Iraqi government, have chosen to side with ISIS.
How do you see this going forward now in the next 1 month or so? I mean, do you see, the forces, the Iraqi government, or for that matter, not a couple of weeks, but a couple of days ago, the Iraqi army, in fact, sent in aeroplanes or sent in their planes to help out the Kurds, but that didn't work out all too well. So how do you see this issue panning out over the next couple of weeks or so?
I think we'll have to see how it goes, because the Americans have basically said that they will try to halt the advance towards Erbil and towards Baghdad, where they have their own diplomats and advisors and their consulate and the embassy. So let's see if the Americans are in effect able, through their aerial bombing, to halt the advance of ISIS.
Right.
But, there's always the possibility that if they actually do advance and there is a skirmish or conflict between American advisors and ISIS, what is it going to lead to? That's a question. But as of now, as I said, if we look carefully at what the Americans have said, they've gone in with a limited mandate and basically have emphasized that they don't see this as an open-ended military involvement, and that it's for the Iraqis to fight
their own
war and to address these issues politically.
All right, Ambassador Shankar, we'll have to leave it at that. Thank you so much for joining us on the show this week and sharing your thoughts and perspectives on this very complex and very important subject. On that note, of course, we'll slip into a short break, but less than 2 weeks since the US and EU hit Russia with their toughest sanctions yet, Russian President Vladimir Putin responds with some sanctions of his own. We'll tell you all about it after this very short break. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Back, you're watching Rajya Sabha television. Well, US Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel met Prime Minister Narendra Modi, External Affairs Minister Sushma Swaraj and Defense Minister Arun Jaitley on Friday. He arrived in Delhi on Thursday evening for a 3-day visit aimed at boosting defense and strategic bilateral ties. His maiden trip as Defense Secretary comes less than a week after Secretary of State John Kerry and Commerce Secretary Penny Pritzker visited India. Here's more.
A month ahead of the much-anticipated Obama-Modi meeting in Washington, US delegates are calling on senior ministers in Delhi to do groundwork for the summit. A week after Secretary of State John Kerry's visit, US Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel is in India to boost defense and strategic ties. He said, and I quote, "The point of my trip here is to take advantage of the opportunity to meet with the new Indian government. We have a number of things, specific projects that we will discuss. One is the renewal of the 10-year Defense Framework Agreement," unquote. During his meeting with Prime Minister Narendra Modi on Friday, India underlined the importance of defense relations in the overall strategic partnership between the two countries. Modi indicated his desire to see further progress in defense relations, including in defense manufacturing in India, technology transfer, exercises and higher studies in the field of defense. Hagel also met External Affairs Minister Sushma Swaraj and Defense Minister Arun Jaitley on Friday. The series of meetings come as India is close to finalizing a $1.4 billion deal to buy at least 22 US Apache and 15 Chinook helicopters. On Wednesday, the cabinet agreed to increase the limit on FDI in defense to 49% in a move to attract international capital. Modi also expressed concern about the deteriorating situation during his talks with Hagel. He also said that he looked forward to his summit meeting with President Barack Obama to discuss how India and the US can build a partnership for peace, stability and prosperity in the world. The summit meeting in Washington will take place on September 29th. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
Well, in a sweeping response to tougher economic sanctions by the West, Russian President Vladimir Putin has ordered retaliatory sanctions. This even as renewed clashes were reported in eastern Ukraine, forcing officials to suspend the search for victims of the crashed flight MH17. Here's more.
Russia's tit-for-tat tactics on the West. In a diplomatic move, President Vladimir Putin ordered retaliatory sanctions against the West. In a decree signed on Wednesday, Putin has put a ban on food and agricultural imports from countries that have imposed sanctions against Russia. Russian news agencies reported that the new sanctions would apply to all agricultural products imported from the US. Fruits and vegetables from the European Union will also be under full ban. Russian officials said that decree is aimed at ensuring the security of the Russian Federation. Meanwhile, US President Barack Obama said that Russian economy has ground to a halt as a result of US and EU sanctions.
The markets, and you look at estimates in terms of capital flight. If you look at projections for Russian growth, what you're seeing is that the economy has ground to a halt.
In Ukraine, fresh clashes rage on. Ukraine's military spokesperson said that 18 Ukrainian servicemen were killed and 54 injured in fresh fighting with separatist rebels near the border in just 24 hours. Ukraine's military forces have taken up their positions in the east as a retaliatory measure. The search for MH17 victims has also been suspended due to fresh fightings.
Проте там склалася ситуація, яка загрожувала великій кількості мирного населення, і штаб АТО прийняв рішення відійти на...
You still have fighting in eastern Ukraine. Civilians are still dying. We've already seen some of the consequences of this conflict in the loss of the Malaysian Airlines. The sooner that we can get back on a track in which there are serious discussions taking place.
Putin's decree comes more than a week after United States and European Union increased economic sanctions on Moscow for supporting pro-Russian separatists. It did not specify which all countries will be affected by the new measures. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
Well, two top leaders of the Meera regime have been sentenced to life imprisonment after being convicted by Cambodia's UN-backed tribunal. The two have been found guilty of crimes against humanity. The defense termed the verdict unjust, saying it would appeal against it.
A UN-backed tribunal in Cambodia on Thursday sentenced the top two surviving cadres of the Meera regime to life in jail. No Shia and Kiyu Samphan were found guilty of their role in the deaths of between 1.7 million to 2.2 million people under the regime. The two were accused of involvement in forced evacuations, murders and executions orchestrated by the regime in 1970s. Outside the courthouse, survivors of the atrocities welcomed the verdict.
ខ្ញុំទទួលយកបាន 100% ប៉ុន្តែខ្ញុំទំនំពោឲ្យសងចំណងជាបុគ្គលដើម្បីឲ្យត្រូវទៅតាមអានេះគេហៅថាច្បាប់រដ្ឋប្រពៃណីរបស់ខ្មែរបាទខ្ញុំអរគុណតុលាការហើយដែលបានកាត់ទោសជនជាប់ចោទ2នាក់នេះអស់មួយជីវិតបាទខ្ញុំពេញចិត្តណាស់បាទខ្ញុំក៏ជាអតីតអ្នកទោសម្នាក់ដែរ
Lawyers for the pair said they would appeal against the ruling. They had insisted on their innocence, dismissing the accusations against them as propaganda and lies.
ខ្ញុំបាទមានចំណាប់អារម្មណ៍ទៅលើសារក្រមរបស់តុលាការពីព្រឹកមិញនេះថាវាជារឿងមួយអយុត្តិធម៌សម្រាប់លោកខៀវសំផនពីព្រោះការកំណត់នៅទោសមិនមានលក្ខណៈឲ្យមានសមស្របទៅតាមអំពើដែលលោកខៀវសំផនបានប្រព្រឹត្តទេ
The verdict was only the second delivered in the tribunal's 9 years of operation. The two men will remain in court to face separate charges of genocide in a second phase of the complex trial that started last week. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
Well, much else has been unfolding around the world. Here's a quick wrap of the other international news of the week. At least 60 people were killed in an Iraqi airstrike in Mosul city that's controlled by ISIS militants. Reports suggested that the strike hit a prison in Mosul. ISIS seized the city in June. Elsewhere, a series of car bombs struck crowded markets in Shia districts of Baghdad, killing at least 47 people. Attacks were also reported in eastern and southern districts of Baghdad over the week. Militants with suspected ties to Nigerian Islamist group Boko Haram have killed 10 people in a raid on a remote village in northern Cameroon. Police say 9 bus passengers and a soldier were shot dead after coming face to face with heavily armed militants in Zigagu. Local media reported that the son of a local chief was also kidnapped during the attack. In recent weeks, the northeastern Nigeria-based militant group Boko Haram has intensified their cross-border raids into Cameroon. Libya's newly elected House of Representatives called for a ceasefire under UN supervision. 130 members of the parliament voted in favor of ending the ongoing fight in the country and letting UN supervise the operations. Libya is embroiled in the worst fighting since the ouster of Muammar Gaddafi. More than 200 people have been killed in the clashes in the last 3 weeks. Floods in Siberia and Bosnia have claimed at least one life 3 months after heavy flooding killed almost 80 people in the region. The latest floods, caused by heavy rains, have damaged roads, bridges and hundreds of homes in western Siberia and in central and northern Bosnia. In May, heavy floods in the same area had affected nearly 2 million people and caused billions of euros worth of damage. Pakistan's military said that it killed at least 30 militants in airstrikes in the North Waziristan tribal region. 6 militant hideouts were destroyed in the Datta Khel area. Media access has been blocked in the area. The army says it has killed more than 550 militants in North Waziristan since it launched an offensive in June. Well, let's shift focus now and bring you up to date with all the international sports news in our Sports Wrap. Spain midfielder Xavi, one of the most decorated footballers of all time, who defined the nation's spectacularly successful tiki-taka possession-based playing style, has retired from internationals at the age of 34. The Barcelona player represented his country 133 times and was a key figure in Spain's glittering run when they won the 2010 World Cup and the 2008 and 2012 European Championships. Manchester United ended their US pre-season tour unbeaten with a 3-1 win over Premier League rivals Liverpool. A Steven Gerrard penalty gave Liverpool the lead, but Wayne Rooney, Juan Mata and Jesse Lingard replied for United. More than 50,000 fans were at the Sun Life Stadium to see the International Champions Cup final. Olympic swim king Michael Phelps and reigning swimmer of the year Ryan Lochte will wage a series of duels in this week's star-studded US National Championships in Irvine, California. Phelps, who has competed in 4 meets since coming out of retirement in April, will face the toughest test of his comeback. He will be participating in the 100-meter freestyle, 100-meter butterfly, 100-meter backstroke and 200-meter individual medley. Ireland pulled off one of the greatest ever shocks in women's rugby by beating reigning champions New Zealand 17-14 in their World Cup pool match in France. It was only the second defeat for the Black Ferns at a World Cup since the tournament began in 1991, ending a run of 20 games unbeaten, during which they won the trophy 4 times in a row. Australian Jeff Ogilvy broke out of a slump with a convincing victory at the $3 million Barracuda Championship in Reno, Nevada. The 2006 US Open champion finished on 21 under par for 49 points and also collected $500,000 for his 8th PGA Tour victory, his first since 2010 when he also won the Australian Open. Finally, as part of the cultural promotion of Colombia in India, the Embassy of Colombia, in collaboration with India International Center, presented Colombia's fusion artist Batarimba. We leave you with visuals of the artist's performance. Enjoy, and we'll see you again same time, same place.